Let me tell you something today, and I want you to hear this with your heart, not just your ears. There comes a moment in life when you stop explaining yourself. You stop overgiving. You stop reaching out to people who never reach back. And when you do that, something powerful happens. Because the moment you don't reach out, the moment you go quiet, the moment you choose self-respect over chasing, oh yes, he notices. Now listen, silence doesn't mean weakness. Silence doesn't mean you lost. Silence is often the loudest message you can send. And here's the truth about what happens in a man's mind when you don't reach out anymore. Not gossip, not guessing. Real psychological truth. He begins to replay, to reflect, to realize things he never noticed when you were always available. And by the end of this, you'll understand one thing clearly. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is no move at all. Listen, confusion hits his ego first. Let me tell you something most people don't understand about silence. Silence doesn't just sit there quietly. Silence walks into a room, pulls up a chair, and starts asking questions nobody was ready to answer. And the very first thing your silence touched wasn't his heart. It was his ego. Because when you didn't reach out, when you didn't send that message, when you didn't check in like you usually do, his mind didn't jump to maturity. It jumped to interruption. You disrupted a pattern he had grown comfortable with. And people don't realize how powerful patterns are until they break. See, he had gotten used to a certain rhythm, a certain expectation. Whether he admitted it or not, your effort had become part of his emotional routine. So when that routine stopped, his ego leaned forward and said, "Wait a minute, what just happened?" Confusion showed up fast, not loud confusion, quiet confusion, the kind that makes someone check their phone without knowing why, the kind that makes them reread old messages, replay conversations, and mentally scroll back to the last interaction, trying to figure out if they missed something. Because when attention suddenly disappears, the ego assumes something changed, and it wants to know if that change was caused by them. This is where people get it twisted. They think his first thought was, she doesn't care. No. His first thought was, why didn't she? That question is ego-centered. It's not about you yet. It's about his position in your life. Your silence didn't make him feel abandoned. It made him feel uncertain. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for the ego. The ego likes predictability. It likes knowing where it stands. It likes knowing that if it leans back, someone else will lean forward. And when you didn't lean forward, the balance shifted. Suddenly, he wasn't sure where he ranked. Suddenly, the invisible reassurance he'd been receiving wasn't there anymore. And the ego hates not knowing. So confusion crept in. He wondered if you were busy. Then he wondered if you were distant. Then he wondered if you were pulling away. And somewhere in that mental spiral, a deeper thought tapped him on the shoulder. What if I mattered more than I realized? That's when confusion stops being casual and starts being personal. Because now his ego wasn't just confused. It was challenged. Your silence forced him to confront a possibility he hadn't considered, that your attention was a choice, not a guarantee. And that realization doesn't land softly. It rattles around in the mind. He might not have said anything. He might have acted normal. But internally, his mind was adjusting to a new reality where the emotional energy wasn't flowing the same direction anymore. And that shift made him aware of something he hadn't respected before. The effort it took for you to show up. Ego confusion doesn't look dramatic. It looks like hesitation. It looks like checking in mentally before acting. It looks like someone wanting reassurance without asking for it. And that's exactly what your silence created, a space where his ego had to sit without being fed. And here's the part you need to understand for yourself. Your silence wasn't an attack. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't punishment. It was simply the absence of overgiving. And when overgiving stops, the ego notices immediately, because egos grow comfortable on unearned consistency. Your silence didn't confuse him because it was cruel. It confused him because it was unfamiliar. And unfamiliar forces awareness. Awareness forces reflection. Reflection forces people to reassess their role in your life. That's why silence feels so loud. It doesn't scream, but it echoes. It echoes questions he wasn't asking when you were always available. It echoes doubts he didn't have when reassurance was constant. It echoes truth. And the truth is this: when you stopped reaching out, his ego realized it was no longer being carried by your effort. It had to stand on its own. And whether he chose to grow from that moment or retreat from it, that confusion was the first crack in the illusion that your presence was automatic. That confusion was the moment the power dynamic shifted. He questioned his value, not yours. Now listen to me carefully, because this part right here is where most people misunderstand what silence actually does. When you didn't reach out, when you stopped being the one who checked in, clarified things, smoothed things over, or kept the connection warm, his mind didn't immediately decide that you weren't enough. That's not how the human mind works. What happened instead was much quieter and much deeper. He started questioning himself. See, attention has a sneaky way of working. When someone consistently receives effort, they don't wake up every day thinking, wow, I'm so lucky. What they feel is stability. And stability can turn into assumption. But when that attention stops, the brain doesn't look outward first. It looks inward. And that's exactly what happened in his mind. He started wondering what changed, not in you, but in him. He replayed his words, his actions, his tone, his timing. He thought about the last interaction and asked himself questions he hadn't asked before. Did I say too much? Did I not say enough? Was I too distant? Was I too comfortable? Because silence removes reassurance, and without reassurance, the mind starts searching for reasons. This is important. Your silence didn't make him feel superior. It made him feel unsure. And uncertainty is not confidence's best friend. When someone is confident in their value, they don't panic when communication slows. But when confidence has been leaning on external validation, silence feels like the floor shifting underneath them. He wasn't sitting there thinking you lost your worth. He was wondering if he had lost his place. That's the difference. Your absence didn't erase you. It made him aware that his position in your life wasn't as secure as he assumed. And that awareness can be uncomfortable, especially for someone who hasn't had to question it before. What your silence did was remove the emotional mirror you had been holding up for him. When you were reaching out, responding quickly, showing interest, you were reflecting his value back to him. Without that reflection, he had to look at himself without assistance. And not everyone is prepared for that moment. He may not have admitted it out loud. He may have acted unaffected. But internally, there was a subtle shift, a realization that he was no longer being validated by your effort. And when validation disappears, people don't automatically think they're better than me. They think, am I still enough to be chosen? That question sits heavy because it challenges identity, not attraction. It challenges confidence, not desire. And that's why silence is so powerful. It doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it doesn't accuse. It simply creates space. And in that space, people hear their own doubts. Your silence forced him to sit with himself, to feel what it's like when the connection isn't being carried by your consistency. And in that stillness, he had to confront whether he had been showing up with the same level of intention, effort, and care. Silence has a way of balancing the scales without saying a word. And here's the part that matters for you. His questioning was never proof that you weren't valuable. It was evidence that your presence had been adding value all along. You don't miss what doesn't matter. You don't question yourself over something insignificant. The fact that your absence caused reflection tells you everything you need to know. People often think being chosen loudly is the ultimate validation. But being missed quietly, that's something different. That's internal. That's real. And when he questioned his value, it meant your silence had shifted the focus away from chasing you and toward understanding himself. Whether he grew from that moment or avoided it doesn't change what happened. For a moment, The emotional spotlight turned inward. And that's not something you forced. That's something your absence revealed. Because when you stop proving your worth, people are left to examine theirs. He felt the loss before he felt gratitude. Let me explain something that human nature doesn't like to admit. People rarely recognize the value of something while it's happening. They recognize it when it stops. And when you didn't reach out, when your presence paused, the first emotion that showed up in his mind was not appreciation. It was loss, because loss gets your attention faster than gratitude ever will. Gratitude is quiet. Loss is loud. Gratitude takes maturity. Loss shows up automatically. And the moment your effort disappeared, he didn't suddenly think, I should have valued her more. No. What he felt first was the discomfort of something familiar no longer being there. Your messages had been a constant. Your attention had been a cushion. Your consistency had been emotional background, noise he didn't consciously listen to. But when it stopped, the silence was impossible to ignore. And that silence didn't feel peaceful to him. It felt empty. This is how the mind works. When something is present, it blends into routine. When it's removed, it becomes noticeable. He felt the gap before he understood the gift. He felt the absence before he acknowledged the impact. And that gap created a subtle sense of loss he couldn't immediately explain. He might not have labeled it as missing you. He might not have said your name in his head, but he felt a disruption, a shift. Something was off. The rhythm had changed. And whenever rhythm changes unexpectedly, the body and mind react before logic catches up. Loss doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like restlessness. Sometimes it feels like checking your phone and not knowing why. Sometimes it feels like a low-level irritation or distraction. That's how loss sneaks in, quietly but persistently. And here's the truth most people don't want to face. He didn't feel thankful first, because your effort had become normal. And normal doesn't trigger appreciation. Normal triggers expectation. So when the expectation wasn't met, the emotional response wasn't, thank you. It was, wait a minute, something's missing. That's when loss began doing its work. He realized the emotional support wasn't there. The check-ins weren't there. The feeling of being considered wasn't there. And only after feeling that absence did his mind start connecting the dots. That's when gratitude gets a chance to enter. But gratitude doesn't arrive on time. It arrives late. It shows up after discomfort, not before. And that's why silence is such a powerful teacher. It doesn't lecture. It lets experience do the explaining. Your absence made him feel what your presence had been providing. And feeling always comes before understanding. You can explain your worth all day long, and it won't land the same way as someone feeling the loss of your effort. He may have resisted that feeling. He may have distracted himself. He may have told himself it didn't matter. But the body keeps score. And emotionally, he noticed the difference. Loss humbles people because it reminds them they were receiving something they didn't earn every day. Your consistency had been filling a space in his life, emotionally, mentally, energetically. And when it stopped, the space didn't disappear. It stayed empty. That emptiness is what eventually makes room for gratitude. Because gratitude isn't about politeness. It's about recognition. Recognition comes after awareness. Awareness comes after loss. And here's the most important part for you to understand. The fact that he felt loss at all means your presence mattered. You don't feel loss over something insignificant. You don't notice absence when there was no impact. Your silence didn't erase you. It outlined you. It traced the shape of what had been there all along. And whether he ever said thank you, whether he ever acknowledged it, that moment of loss was real. It was internal. And it was the bridge between taking you for granted and realizing what your presence actually brought into his life. Loss was the lesson. Gratitude was the afterthought. His pride fought his curiosity. When you didn't reach out, when the silence stretched longer than expected, a quiet war started in his mind. And it wasn't between logic and emotion. It was between pride and curiosity. Two powerful forces pulling him in opposite directions, both demanding control. Curiosity spoke first. Curiosity is soft but persistent. It asked simple questions. What's going on with her? Did something change? Should I check in? Curiosity wanted answers, clarity, reassurance. It wanted to move toward connection. Curiosity didn't care how it looked. It just wanted to know. But pride showed up louder. Pride said, don't reach out first. Pride said, if she wants to talk, she will. Pride said, and pride hates uncertainty, but it hates vulnerability even more. So instead of acting, he paused. Instead of asking, he waited. Instead of following curiosity, he listened to pride, not because pride was right, but because pride protects image. And for a lot of people, protecting image feels safer than protecting connection. This is where silence does its most revealing work. Your silence didn't just make him wonder. It forced him to choose which voice he trusted more. The part of him that wanted truth, or the part of him that wanted control. Pride told him that reaching out would give up leverage, that it would tip the balance, that it would mean admitting he cared more than he wanted to show. Curiosity told him that not reaching out meant risking distance, misunderstanding, and loss. And that internal debate kept looping. That's why sometimes people do nothing even when they care. Inaction isn't always indifference. Sometimes it's fear dressed up as confidence. He checked his phone. He thought about sending something casual. He typed a message and deleted it. He told himself he'd wait another day. Pride kept moving the finish line. Not yet. Let's see what she does. If she really cares, she'll reach out. But here's the truth. Pride doesn't want resolution. Pride wants to win. And winning to pride means not being the one who moves first. Curiosity, on the other hand, just wanted relief from not knowing. Curiosity was uncomfortable with the silence. Pride pretended it wasn't. And the longer the silence lasted, the louder the tension became. Your silence exposed that struggle. Because when communication is flowing, pride can hide behind routine. But when things go quiet, pride has to work overtime to justify doing nothing. And the justifications start sounding hollow even to the person thinking them. He may have told himself stories that you were busy, that it wasn't a big deal, that things would reset on their own. But curiosity kept tapping him on the shoulder, reminding him that something had shifted. This is the moment where character shows up, because eventually one voice wins. Either curiosity overcomes pride and he reaches out with honesty, or pride overpowers curiosity and he stays silent to protect his ego. And that outcome tells you everything. If curiosity won, it meant he valued connection more than control. If pride won, it meant image mattered more than understanding. Your silence didn't force either result. It revealed which one already had the stronger hold on him. That's why silence isn't passive. It's clarifying. It removes distractions and leaves people alone with their true motivators. No chasing, no explaining, no emotional hand-holding, just space. And in that space, pride either softens or hardens. What matters for you is this: his internal battle was never your responsibility to manage. You didn't create it. You didn't owe him relief from it. The discomfort he felt was the price of self-awareness, trying to break through ego. Because curiosity leads to growth, pride leads to distance, and silence forces people to choose. Whether he reached out or stayed quiet, that choice wasn't about timing. It was about who he was willing to be when there was no guarantee, no reassurance, and no one making it easy for him. Your silence didn't shut him out. It simply stopped making it safe for pride to hide. He realized you were a choice, not a guarantee. At some point during the silence, something shifted in his understanding. It didn't happen all at once. It didn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic realization. It settled in slowly, quietly, and unmistakably. He realized you were not a guarantee. You were a choice. And that realization has a way of changing how someone sees everything. Before the silence, your presence may have felt stable to him, predictable. Not because you were boring, but because you were consistent. You showed up, you responded, you cared. And consistency, when it's uninterrupted, can be mistaken for permanence. People start believing that what's been there will always be there. But when you didn't reach out, when you stepped back without explanation or drama, that sense of permanence cracked. For the first time, he had to face the idea that you weren't locked in. You weren't assigned to him. You weren't obligated to keep choosing him. That realization doesn't feel flattering at first. It feels unsettling because guarantees are comfortable. Guarantees require no effort. Guarantees allow people to relax into minimal investment. But choices demand awareness. Choices require intention. And when someone realizes they are being chosen, not guaranteed, responsibility enters the picture. He began to understand that your attention wasn't automatic, that your effort wasn't unlimited, that your presence was something you decided to give, not something he was entitled to receive. And entitlement doesn't survive silence very well. This is where respect either grows or collapses. When someone realizes they could lose access to you, they start seeing you differently. Not because you changed, but because the illusion changed. He started noticing that you had agency, that you had options, that your life didn't revolve around waiting. And that awareness can be uncomfortable for someone who had grown used to being central without earning it daily. Your silence reminded him that you were participating, not attached, that you were engaging, not clinging. And those are very different dynamics. Participation is voluntary. Attachment is assumed. When participation pauses, assumptions get exposed. He may have thought, she's always been here. But silence wrote that sentence into, she's been choosing to be here. And that difference matters because people treat guarantees casually. They treat choices carefully. Once he saw you as a choice, he had to confront a new question. Have I been choosing her back? Not passively enjoying her presence, but actively selecting her with intention, effort, and respect. Silence has a way of making that question unavoidable. This is the moment where some people step up. They realize that access to you requires engagement, not comfort. That connection requires contribution, not assumption. And they respond by showing more care, more clarity, more consistency. Others don't. Some people retreat when they realize something isn't guaranteed, because guarantees feel safe and choices feel risky. Choices require vulnerability. They require effort without certainty, and not everyone is ready for that. But regardless of what he chose to do, your silence already did its work. It reframed the dynamic. It shifted the power from habit to awareness. And here's what matters most for you. This realization wasn't about punishing him. It was about honoring yourself. You didn't withdraw to prove a point. You withdrew because you stopped pouring into something that wasn't meeting you with the same intention. By doing that, you reminded both of you that your time, energy, and presence are valuable, that they are offered, not owed. When someone understands they are not guaranteed access to you, they learn something essential. Either they rise to meet the responsibility of choosing you intentionally, or they reveal that they were only comfortable when things required nothing of them. And that knowledge, that's priceless, because being a choice doesn't make you uncertain. It makes you powerful. Your silence taught you who he really is. While you were focused on what your silence was doing to him, something far more important was happening to you. Your silence became a teacher. Not a punishment, not a strategy, a teacher. And what it taught you was not about potential promises or words, it taught you about character. Because silence doesn't create behavior, it reveals it. When you stopped reaching out, you removed yourself as the glue. You stopped being the bridge. You stopped being the one who carried the emotional weight of keeping things alive. And once that effort was gone, the connection was left to stand on its own. That's when the truth showed up. See, when you're always present, always checking in, always extending understanding, people can hide behind comfort. They can look invested without actually investing. They can feel close without actually showing up. Your effort can cover for someone else's lack of clarity, but silence removes the cover. When you went quiet, you didn't demand answers. You didn't force conversations. You didn't chase reassurance. You simply stepped back. And in that space, he had a choice not to react, but to respond, to show intention, to show curiosity, to show care. What he did next mattered. If he leaned in, if he reached out with honesty, if he tried to understand instead of protect his ego, that told you something real. It told you that connection mattered more to him than convenience. That growth mattered more than pride. That effort wasn't one-sided. But if he disappeared, avoided, delayed, or acted unaffected, that told you something too. Not something painful, something useful. It told you that when effort wasn't being supplied for him, he didn't know how to supply it himself. Silence doesn't reward words. It rewards action. And that's why it's such a powerful truth teller. Because people can say anything when things are easy.